There's a lot of questions people are asking with regards to the HIV test. They've never been validated to diagnose HIV.
Depends what test you're using.
Well, any test, the ELISA, Western blot, PCR, and all non-specific tests.
The PCR cannot not be non-specific. It's an extremely specific test in itself. Test the DNA of a particular organism. You can't mistake that. There's at least 100 or 150 sequences of nucleotides that you can that you have to verify. You can't mistake that. Like, that cannot be a false positive there. Because the HIV genome is very specific and is very different than a human one.
Are you aware that studies that have been conducted have found that the HIV genome varies by up to 40%?
Okay. But it varies in parts of the genome that are variable, but there are also parts of the genome that the parasite needs, that the bug needs, that the virus needs, that cannot change, because otherwise it wouldn't work. So there are certain proteins that virus absolutely necessitates, so that those cannot change.
Right. So those 10 specific proteins have names. Are you familiar with the different names for those 10 proteins?
Why do I need to be familiar with those names?
Because if they're specific and they exist in all HIV patients who are deemed to be HIV positive, then that would be fine. But I've read that none of those proteins are specific for HIV, including the core proteins, namely GP41 and P24. And even aside from that, the researchers don't expect to find all 10 proteins in every person deemed to be HIV positive, which seems to be it's a bit conspicuous.
So I'm not familiar with that research. I've never heard of it. You could be right. I don't know.
All the studies of discord and couples, the findings are misleading because they don't take into account the common fact that many of those couples were having unprotected sex for many years before the studies even started, sometimes up to 15 years.
Okay.
And the zero conversion rate actually in itself comes across as compelling evidence to show that HIV is not sexually transmitted anyway, even if the tests are specific.
So you're saying that HIV is not sexually transmitted?
Yeah.
I'm confused. So if you're raising everything that we believe in right now as far as HIV, do you have any theories that would replace what we believe? I mean, how is HIV transmitted?
Yeah, I do. The Ugandan Bureau of Statistics in the 2007 booklet of verbal reports of child mortality reveals that, and the statistics are not quite accurate, but they report that in only 6% of cases are children dying of so-called HIV/AIDS.
Okay.
That means 94% of children are dying of other causes, of which no organisation, no matter how compassionate their images, are interested in those 94%.
Yeah.
The other causes are categorised into three: malaria, 38%, and then followed by meningitis, and then I think followed by neonatal and perinatal conditions, followed by pneumonia. Now, according to a reliable source, who's a doctor who works at Mildmay, he says that the 38% for malaria should be 60%, and the 6% for HIV/AIDS should be 2%.
Okay.
And this was also confirmed by a pharmacist who's a friend of mine who works for the Children's AIDS Foundation in Uganda Road.
Okay, so the numbers are inflated?
And they both confirmed that in their respective organisations, any child who's deemed to be HIV negative, which that accounts for 98% if their figures are correct, are discharged.
Because there's no money for them. no money in the healthcare system.
They're making no money, but people don't seem to care anyway. Because at the same time as drawing a wage, which is more than the average person is drawing, they're not using any of that money to buy food to give to the children in order to prevent them from being malnourished.
Absolutely agree with you. I think there's a lot of foreign aid going into HIV, in an unbalanced manner.
Yeah.
So I agree with you in that aspect. But I don't think I understood. So what does replace? If it's not sexually transmitted, if it's not, what is HIV? What is it? What's going on?
The way it's been presented to me, if we look at the different groups of people who are still considered to be the same high-risk groups of people after 26 years, they each, when they're diagnosed with AIDS, they have different AIDS-defining illnesses, depending on where they come from or which risk group they come from.
Okay.
They vary. But in the case of Africans, because we're both here now, we might as well stick to that, their AIDS-defining illnesses that create the pretext for giving them the toxic drugs.
Yeah.
ARVs, TB, malaria, other diseases which might vary. They have sarcoma and those diseases have known causes and treatments, and they've been around for hundreds of years. Even sarcoma has been around for something like 150 years.
Right.
But what changes their prognosis, despite this concept called positive living, they're told that they can have a partner again, they can have children, they can have a job, they can just continue life, plan for the future, positive living, all the rest of it. But really, those messages seem only to be there to protect the industry. Because many people are still committing suicide, according to a counsellor I spoke to a few months ago.
In Africa?
And many people turn to alcohol as a consolation, even though they're told not to, because they don't see any way forward. If they can't have sex, and I would be the same. If somebody told me I couldn't have sex again, I would probably, if I didn't kill myself, I'd probably lose hope.
Okay.
There's nothing else worth living for.
So what you're saying is that they shouldn't be told that they have HIV, that they're told that they have HIV in error.
Yeah. Many professionals come very quick to jump in and say that, well, of course we recognise there's poverty and AIDS has many causes, but they're only essentially focusing on one in practice, and they're only being paid to focus on one.
Are you talking about the foreign aid? Or are you talking about the Ugandan doctors?
Local NGOs.
Right.
International and local. There seems not to be so much difference.
Well, that's because if you turn around to the Western world and you tell them, give me money so we can help kids with malaria in Africa, no one's going to do that. They will give you money to help AIDS in Africa, but not malaria.
They've had 26 years and $250 billion of research money being swallowed up. They failed to produce a single benefit in terms of can be translated into health improvements for patients.
Well, I think ARVs are a pretty big improvement.
They would seem to be, but people don't take into account certain factors, like the doses of the drugs have been reduced from the maximum 1,800 milligrams down to a minimum of 200. This would create the illusion that people are living longer on the drugs as opposed to not dying as early. But also the clinical conditions of which people are having their ARVs administered is different. 15, 20 years ago, people were almost bedridden when they started taking ARVs. Today, they're people like you and me, walking in off the street, being tested for their antibodies, and then being told to take Septin and come back to CD4 counting at 3 monthly intervals, and then when the CD4 count comes down, 6 months, they're then put on ARVs. And the people, again, there's a huge grey area when it comes to CD4 counting, because it's not taken into account that sunlight causes CD4 count decline, citrine causes CD4 count decline, stress causes CD4 count decline, and TB causes CD4 decline.
So they're being put on ARVs earlier?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because the research is proceeding in a way where it can only afford to come up with findings that can stimulate the industry.
Right.
There's other research going on that will make sure that people who are tested positive in the future will be on ARVs immediately. Also that anybody who's on ARVs it will be mandatory. And other research is going on that will ensure that even people who are deemed to be HIV negative will be on ARVs.
Prophylaxis.
Yeah. Pre-exposure prophylaxis.
Right.
So it's moving forward, and I don't know what comes after that.
Okay.
But it would seem strange that we have this huge emphasis from the international community that seem to be funded by the likes of the Rockefeller Foundation, Population Council, and other depopulation agencies. And yet, in their messages, they exclude talking about AIDS.
You mean they don't want themselves to be associated with funding this thing, or what do you mean?
Well, they want the credit for the assumed benefits that have been introduced for so-called AIDS patients, but at the same time, they want to tell us that they're concerned about reducing the world's population. And I don't know if there's a connection, but it seems kind of strange that they never talk about AIDS when they're talking about population reduction.
Who's talking about population reduction?
It was on the TV in Zana, I stay in Zana, yesterday or the day before on a news report.
Okay. What about population?
Population has to be reduced by, because it's nearly 7 billion, it has to come down to 4 million within so many years.
Okay. So you're saying AIDS per se doesn't necessarily have a connection with HIV?
Yeah. People are malnourished, especially children in schools. I mean, they're not getting a balanced diet. Because parents are expected to prioritise by putting children in schools, so most of the money goes into paying for school fees. And then certainly children in boarding schools, they go hungry.
Okay. All right.
But aside from that, malnutrition is a serious problem in general. 50% of the population continue to live and die without adequate nutrition, clean drinking water and sanitation.
But they don't end up with zoster and Kaposi sarcoma with malnutrition. Not all of them, so why this particular?
I'm not sure about those less frequent diseases, but it's been said that those can be put down to changing lifestyles or even vaccinations. But I think nobody really knows. We also have lots of new diseases that are being catalogued, but nobody's assuming that when we have these new diseases, that we also have AIDS in the Western countries.
So are you saying that it goes both ways, that you could have AIDS? Okay, let's step back a little bit. In Western countries, you don't have that much malnutrition, yet you still have AIDS.
And it's on a relative. It's probably happens on a relative scale, except that first world AIDS and third world AIDS are different by definition to start with, but also there are different target groups. Well, there are different target groups like drug addicts, pregnant women, but not so much as here. Hemophiliacs and homosexuals. but also black people. Now they account for 50% of the new infections in America being among blacks, and yet blacks account for 5% of the United States population. And this comes across as proof to the organizations and the charities that sexual behavior is different among blacks, even there. And they're convinced because of the testing. And yet the tests, there are 70 conditions that cause positive results other than HIV, and the people promote the tests. They don't know that.
So we have a lot of false positives.
What's the difference between a true positive and a false positive if the test isn't even looking for the virus anyway?
Oh, the test is not looking for the virus.
Yeah.
What is it looking for?
Non-specific antibodies, which you already knew. Well, you didn't know they were non-specific, but...
I didn't know that, no. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I don't know a lot of the research that you're talking about, so I can't formulate an opinion on that.
There's a significant and growing arm of the AIDS establishment that is compelled to silence and censor any dissent. And they do that by preempting the open vocabulary and insisting that anybody who questions AIDS is a denialist and potentially a killer.
Yeah. It's a big dilemma, you know. You can't cure it, so you put a lot of question marks on it, I guess. People get afraid. It's a fear tactic. All of the above. But yeah, I don't know. I've worked with a lot of AIDS patients. I've seen a lot of CD4 counts. A lot of people of different ages coming in sick. So I don't know. The nutrition bit doesn't quite convince me.
Among children or adults?
Adults, obviously.
Okay.
You see 50-year-old women, you see 30-year-old men.
Yeah.
All of it.
What I've heard is the explanation why children don't develop AIDS and why adults do when they're exposed to the same condition is the stress factor. Adults respond to stress and they exacerbate it with thinking. Whereas children, they don't even understand the concept of death, let alone sex.
So you're saying the moment you tell someone they have HIV, they get stressed and their CD4 levels go down?
Yeah. And I think that even though every counsellor recognises the factor, they don't really get to appreciate just how important it is because of political correctness. The operations manager of Major Oranga's organisation, called George, he told me last week he accepts that there's political correctness that can both prevent the counsellor from telling the truth to the client,
which is what is the truth,
and also prevent the client from telling the truth to the counsellor. Obviously, the counsellor doesn't want to admit that so many people have tested positive here and then tested negative elsewhere, or that people have not done so well on the drugs. In fact, they've died of liver failure or renal failure. And the client doesn't want to admit to the counsellor that he's had sex with 10 sex workers without using condoms over the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Because he figures, just like I used to, that if I tell the counsellor the truth, that information could influence the result of the test and also influence the compassion that you get in the future from the health professionals.
Yeah. But that's the case with a lot of medicine, right? This miscommunication between the provider and the client.
Yeah.
It so happens that in HIV, it can have more dire results.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anything you can do about that. But back to your question. So you're saying that this is a cause of stress and a cause of lowered CD4 counts.
Yeah. Yeah. And sepsin.
And?
I was given a leaflet from an organisation that has set itself up in the market
Okay.
where the poorest of the poor people who have jobs work. And on that leaflet, I read the adverse events, side effects section, and in there is mentioned leukopenia.
Which one? What is that?
T-cell depletion.
Oh, okay.
And when I remarked on this to the clinical officer who gave it to me, he had no idea.
Yeah, that's interesting. That is interesting, I agree. What was this advertisement for? This leaflet, what was it for?
It had the other name of Tetrin printed on it.
Oh, I see.
This one. Well, what's your job, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm a student. I'm a medical student.
Are you finishing it?
No, I'm just first year.
All right.
Just starting. Barely.
You seem to know a lot already.
No. I'm just scratching the surface, pretty much. Yes. But tell me though, I have two questions for you. So one, what is the eventual culmination of your research? What do you want to do with it? Sorry, 1 second. I'm sorry. I need to take this.
Yeah.
What do you want to do with this research?
I don't know what you mean.
Do you want to publish it? Do you want to?
It's been. Oh, that's not even the right one. It's been published. I mean, all the facts. If we can
they're
agree,
there, but you're not
if we can agree that
compiled.
they're facts, they've been published in mainstream medical journals. One of the problems is that AIDS doctors don't get time to read through studies.
But
They're only ever exposed to the conclusion. There was a study of discordant couples done in the US over at least 6 years, followed up for 10. 175 discordant couples. Nancy Pagan was the leading researcher. And at the end of the study, the people were practicing all kinds of sex, anal, vaginal and oral. And before the study started, there were 75% not using condoms. After the study ended, still 25% not using condoms. And it was a study of heterosexual transmission. And the result of zero conversions was nil.
okay.
But all other studies, also conducted in Uganda, produced, you can't say similar results, but very low results that actually serve as compelling evidence that whatever's making people sick is not infectious, not sexually transmitted. So there's a study done here, and the result was 5 couples, five negatives, 0 converted out of 100. And then a study done in Haiti of 600 and something discordant couples. After 6 years, only 34 0 converted. But again, that's only based on presence of non-specific antibodies.
It's great news. That means you can have sex. But it is transmitted. Somehow it is transmitted. Okay, so the tests are not... So you're saying that, on one hand, there is no sexual transmission or very little. The tests are not good to determine that. Are you even saying there is a virus? Is there a virus out there?
Duisberg, who studied retroviruses for 20 years, was the one who actually came out and reported that 20 years of studying retroviruses failed to correlate cancer with a viral cause.
Right.
But he maintains that HIV exists. But it's incapable, completely incapable of causing AIDS. And yet even Luc Montagnier, who won the Nobel Peace Prize in December for discovering HIV, has always maintained that stress is a cofactor and that HIV cannot cause AIDS on its own. And then there are other researchers with different opinions. There's one called Stefan Lanka, who just says outright there's no HIV, AIDS has other causes. And then there's a group of researchers in Australia who for almost 20 years now have been saying that all the tests are useless they've actually studied the tests.
Mm-hmm.
The only researchers ever who have studied the tests and conclude through proper findings that they're non-specific, and they've even compiled independent studies that have shown that the tests produce different results, like the Western blot. There was one study that's on that disc. So they're giving it to you. A sample was sent to 39 different labs, and they got 39 different results.
Well, it's a yes or no. Oh, it's a Western blot. Okay.
But this statement here, this comes on the package insert of the PCR.
But this would only, I mean, yes, I agree that it specifically says that you have to have clinical presentation and other laboratory markers. So it's telling you this straight up. So that means you, as a clinician, you have to get multiple different tests in order to ascertain that it is HIV.
And every single test is stated that it requires additional testing, which is patent of circular logic. But in Africa, people don't get the chance
to have
retest and retest. And even if they do get the chance to retest, they're given these even more non-specific tests called rapid tests. Which often they have to pay for. And 10,000 shillings or even 3,000 shillings can mean the difference between not having enough food today.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
And maybe getting sick after a week as a result of the immune system being not kept optimal.
And I'm grossly generalizing. I have not had too much patient experience, but HIV is not what it used to be as far as the impact that it has on people. It is known that there are ARVs there that keep you alive for a very long time. It is not a death sentence anymore. People live for a long time with HIV when they do take their drugs. And I've almost found, and again, it's a very limited number of people that I've interacted with, but there's not a desperation or a scare or sort of the stress level that I would find, I think, if someone were to tell me that. So I think there's a different relationship with death, if I may, and suffering in Africa than it is in the Western. So bringing our Western standards here and applying them, I don't know if you could do that directly without taking into account the sort of the local and the native view, socioeconomic things like that. That's my opinion. So I agree with you that it is a stressful thing to know. But you also know that your friend, your brother, your cousin has HIV and they're on medication and they're perfectly fine. It's like they don't even have it. So I didn't see as much of the stress as I would have expected to.
A friend of mine in England has been a heroin addict for 22 years, injected. I was surprised last year to find that she's still alive. We haven't met for 15 years. I was sure she must have quit the habit because I hadn't really spoken to her for 20 years. She's still there. She doesn't look particularly fatigued. She doesn't look much different to any other 45-year-old. Would it sound insane to suggest that she's alive today because of the heroin?
No. I mean, yes, that would be insane. So I see what you're saying. You're saying that they're alive not because of the ARVs. No. I'm saying from the perspective of someone that knows you have HIV, eventually you will die. Hence, when someone tells you you have HIV, the stress level goes up. That's what you're saying. Because of this stress level, their CD4 count goes down. That's your argument. I am saying that used to be the case, but now with the medication and the fact that every NGO in all of Africa is giving out ARVs for free, people have access to them.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you live longer.
Yeah. Which is an idea.
That is the idea, but that's also what your doctors tell you, and that's what the community tells you, and that's what you know now.
I agree.
What I'm saying is then that stress level is lowered.
Yeah. The stress level is lowered, but the ARVs are getting the credit.
Yes. Yes. But the argument that stress causes a CD4 decrease, I didn't see it. I didn't see the stress, is what I'm saying. So I don't necessarily see that as a CD4 decrease. As for the rest, again, I don't know. It's an interesting theory. I will be willing to look into it. Absolutely.